Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Simon Marks, live from Washington, D.C. And these are the main headlines this Tuesday. Russia's defense minister accuses the West of dragging out Moscow's military operation by supplying Kiev with arms. The Biden administration announces a ban on anti-satellite missile tests by the United States. It urges other nations to follow suit, saying the tests create dangerous debris in orbit. Marine Le Pen tones down her rhetoric on her proposed hijab ban as her fight with Emmanuel Macron for the French presidency enters the last leg. Ahead of a make-or-break TV debate tomorrow, the far-right leader is trying to soften her image to gain popularity. After nearly 3 weeks, Shanghai prepares to ease its lockdown, with authorities hoping COVID transmissions will mostly be limited to quarantine facilities. The Prime Ministers of India, Bhutan, Nepal and Bangladesh, along with the World Health Organization chief, inaugurate virtually a global centre for traditional medicine at Gujarat's Jamnagar. And football superstar Cristiano Ronaldo will miss Manchester United's big clash against Liverpool tonight after disclosing news of the tragic death of his newborn son.
Cristiano, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo te sientes?
The finance ministers and central bank governors of G20 nations are gathering here in Washington for a series of meetings this week. It marks the first gathering of the G20 since Russia's war on Ukraine began. Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, says she will boycott several meetings if Russian officials participate in them. But she says she will attend the opening session to show support for the Ukrainian finance minister, who will be flying into the US from Kiev. After the opening speeches, Yellen says she will skip other sessions over Russia's presence. Both the US and Europe will face the unwelcome prospect of Russian Finance Minister Anton Sulyanov participating virtually. He was hit with US sanctions earlier this year. The meetings are emerging as a big test for how the world's leading international bodies will respond to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Many participating countries have condemned Russia, but some of the most influential members have not, including China and India. Several other wealthy nations, including much of Europe, of course, depend heavily on Russian energy, and the upcoming meetings will highlight how deeply entangled Russia's economy now is with the rest of the world, and how a series of Western sanctions are impacting the Russian economy. Our correspondent Susan Tehrani joins us now live from the streets of New York. Susan, it's good to see you. This decision by Janet Yellen to boycott some of these sessions of the G20 meeting here in Washington, very principled, of course, on the part of the US Treasury Secretary, but doesn't it dilute the impact that the United States can have on the outcomes of those meetings?
Right, Simon, some suggest that this is a missed opportunity on the part of the United States to express its concerns directly to Russia during these meetings, and that Janet Yellen should indeed remain in the room and confront Russia directly. And it's an opportunity for Washington to challenge Kremlin's war efforts. However, others say that these people are not professional communicators, and this is not the proper setting to do that. But, you know, also this dilemma over participation really opens up the broader conversation and question over how the United States can really sway G20 member states at a time when the economic atmosphere is so competitive around the world, as you mentioned earlier, and the long-term issues of how to manage the global economy ultimately with so many powerful and diverse actors. Whether or not one country can, for example, boycott a session, it will have the effect that it wants, or whether or not, these entanglements really will play a greater role or not.
Susan, just within the next few minutes, President Biden is going to be participating in a virtual meeting with many of his allies and partners internationally over the crisis in Ukraine. It comes within hours of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying that the Russians have begun a fresh onslaught focused on Donbass, that eastern region that, of course, features the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk. And all of this is coming at a point where President Biden is now under pressure from at least one prominent Democrat on Capitol Hill to do more to deepen America's engagement in the Ukraine conflict.
You know, in recent weeks, there has been growing concern that among media pundits and even some media outlets here in the United States, we've been echoing and hearing the call for sending boots on the ground to Ukraine. It started on different networks. There was an outcry really by among many when a news commentator said that we should send boots on the ground. I'm here. This is what should happen. And then, we heard from Democrat Chris Coons saying that on CBS recently. Adam Kissinger, he's a Republican. He echoed that call of sending boots on the ground to Ukraine. These are words that are being thrown around. But on the other hand, there was just this report yesterday that Malcolm Nance, who's an MSNBC contributor, he appeared on MSNBC in Ukraine. We found out that an MSNBC analyst just joined Ukrainian forces for their fight against Russia. And many are calling this very dangerous, considering the fact that, calling for boots on the ground on the part of the United States is a policy that the Americans have so far decided not to take. And it's something that doesn't have an appetite among the American public because, first of all, it's not a rally around the flag issue. America is not directly involved in this conflict. And second of all, it would really change the dynamic of the war. Two nuclear powers getting involved with each other on the one hand, and then America being part of NATO on the other. An attack on one would be an attack on the other. NATO would essentially be involved in the conflict. So it's a little curious to understand as to why these comments are being made to send American troops into Ukraine at this point to fight against Russia, and how there isn't sort of some kind of oversight or hearing when members of the different parties are making these comments publicly, or whether or not it's sort of some kind of preparation on the part of the administration to prepare the American public for an announcement on the part of the Biden administration, which both scenarios seem to be concerning nonetheless.
Well, of course, words have consequences. And when President Biden called what's taking place in Ukraine an act of genocide by Russia, it is perhaps not surprising that there are some figures within his own party who are saying, in that case, the United States ought to be doing something about it. Susan Tehrani, WION's correspondent, live for us today in New York City. Thanks as ever, Susan. The United States government has committed to ending the practice of anti-satellite missile tests in space. Vice President Kamala Harris, who chairs the National Space Council, announced the self-imposed ban at the Vandenberg Space Force Base in California.
I am pleased to announce that as of today, the United States commits not to conduct destructive, direct ascent, anti-satellite missile testing. Simply put, these tests are dangerous, and we will not conduct them. We are the first nation to make such a commitment, and today, on behalf of the United States of America, I call on all nations to join us.
This is the first of its kind ban, and it's part of the Biden administration's strategy to promote the responsible use of space. Anti-satellite weapons tests see a spacecraft in orbit destroyed with a missile system. Countries performing ASAT tests historically have done so by targeting their own assets in space. Plans for the ban were set late last year after the Russian military destroyed a defunct satellite. The test created thousands of pieces of debris in low Earth orbit, and it even sent astronauts on the International Space Station into their emergency shelter as the craft passed through a shrapnel field. To date, only 4 countries have destroyed their own satellites in ASAT tests: the US, Russia, China, and India.
These tests are part of their efforts to develop anti-satellite weapons systems. These weapons are intended to deny the United States our ability to use our space capabilities by destroying our satellites which are critical to our national security. These tests, to be sure, are reckless and they are irresponsible. These tests also put in danger so much of what we do in space.
Space debris, or space junk as it's known, has become a new concern for the world's space agencies. Astronauts on the International Space Station carry out an avoidance maneuver so that their craft does not get hit by a piece of debris as they float in zero gravity. Here's a short illustration of how this so-called space junk is formed.
Millions of pieces of man-made debris are currently orbiting the Earth. This huge cloud of space junk is suspended between 800 and 2,000 kilometers above us. Since space exploration began in 1957, fragments from more than 6,000 space launches and 600 orbital explosions have been accumulating. Old rockets, out-of-order satellites, tools lost by astronauts, and even flecks of paint pose a serious threat to future space exploration, particularly manned flights and stations. Sensors carried on space vehicles only tend to detect micro-debris, but damage from a collision can be serious due to the very fast orbital speed of this debris, travelling at some 28,000 kilometers an hour. The International Space Station, for example, has had to perform avoidance maneuvers around 30 times, and astronauts have had to take refuge 5 times. There is also the risk of debris slamming into the hundreds of Earth observation and telecommunication satellites which orbit the Earth. Billions of dollars worth of weather monitoring equipment, global navigation, and communication systems are at risk. The big fear is of a collision occurring and triggering a chain reaction, known as the Kessler syndrome. Over 30,000 pieces of debris measuring more than 10 centimeters, and sometimes as big as a bus, are currently being tracked and followed from Earth by radars and telescopes. Space agencies are working on debris recovery systems. Nets, harpoons, sails, everything is envisaged to deal with the risk of collision. In 2025, ESA is due to launch the Clear Space mission, a sort of satellite cleaner that will use its articulated arms to recover a piece of an old European rocket and deorbit it.
Now, despite a significant rise in nationwide cases of COVID-19 due to the more contagious Omicron subvariant, a federal judge in the United States has scrapped face masks for public transport, a mandate that was imposed by the Biden administration. According to District Judge Catherine Kimball, a Trump appointee, the mask mandate exceeds the statutory authority of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The federal agency, she says, does not have any valid reasons to continue with the COVID curbs. The mandate that required face masks on public transport, including aeroplanes, trains and buses, was recently extended by the CDC amid that spike in COVID cases across the United States. The US has reported a 7-day average of nearly 35,000 new infections as of last Friday. That is a 36% increase from the figures of just 2 weeks ago. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, meanwhile, has called the ruling disappointing. She said that federal agencies are now assessing the court's judgment and that the Justice Department will now determine whether to appeal the decision or not.
The CDC recommended continuing the order for additional time, 2 weeks, to be able to assess the latest science in keeping with its responsibility to protect the American people. So this is obviously a disappointing decision. The CDC continues recommending wearing a mask in public transit.
The scrapping of masks brought mixed reactions from the general public. While some lauded the move, others, including many public health experts, are concerned about a further virus flare-up in the coming days and weeks.
I just feel like mask mandates are coming down too quickly. People at my school are getting it like every day. I just feel like mask mandates are coming down too quickly. People at my school are getting it like every day.
The US Transportation Security Administration is no longer enforcing the mask mandate on public transportation. The court's ruling has also prompted major US airlines quickly to drop the face mask requirement, even making announcements in mid-flight and telling staff and passengers that they could remove their face coverings. United Airlines said in a statement that face masks would no longer be required on domestic flights from now on, but passengers and crews can, if they choose, keep a face mask on. Other carriers like Delta Airlines and Alaska Airlines also made similar announcements. After nearly 3 weeks, Shanghai is preparing to ease its COVID-19 lockdown, with authorities hoping that transmissions will mostly be limited to quarantine facilities. City authorities revealed the first virus deaths on Monday since the lockdowns were imposed, with the latest fatalities bringing the total official toll to 10. Beijing insists that its zero COVID policy of hard lockdowns, mass testing and lengthy quarantines has averted fatalities and the public health crises that have engulfed the rest of the world. However, some have cast doubt on official figures in a nation whose vast elderly population has a low vaccination rate. Shanghai health officials noted that less than 2/3 of residents over the age of 60 had received 2 COVID jabs, and less than 40% had received a booster. The Shanghai Municipal Health Commission said that the 7 victims were aged between 60 and 101, adding that all of them suffered from underlying conditions including heart disease and diabetes. The commission said the patients became severely ill after admission to hospital and died after ineffective rescue efforts. Shanghai also reported over 20,000 new COVID cases, with a vast majority of them being asymptomatic. Many of Shanghai's 25 million residents have been confined to their homes since March, as daily caseloads have topped 25,000, which was previously unheard of in China. In Hong Kong, quarantine measures and isolation facilities have generated excess amounts of medical and plastic waste, Activists in China have raised concerns about the adverse environmental impacts of the government's strict COVID-19 policies.
From remote controls wrapped in cellophane to pillows encased in plastic bags. Right now, new arrivals into Hong Kong are met by single-use plastic everywhere they turn. The city is one of the few places that holds to a zero COVID policy, which means travellers are required to quarantine in a hotel on arrival. The policy is being criticised not only for the impact on mental health and the economy, but environmentalists say it also leads to excess waste. Skincare entrepreneur Clementine Vaughan flew into Hong Kong this month.
All the kind of surfaces that typically you would touch with your hands, like the phones, the remote controllers, everything's been cellophane wrapped.
According to government figures, Hong Kong disposes of more than 2,300 tonnes of plastic waste every day. And with a recycling rate of just 11%, most of it ends up in landfill sites.
This disposable face mask is made of plastic. And over time, it will eventually become microplastics and will get into the ocean.
Edwin Lau is an environmentalist from the charity The Green Earth. He says Hong Kong's approach to COVID reflects its lack of environmental awareness, arguing that plastics from quarantine hotels should be reused or recycled.
People living in the quarantine hotels, they are not confirmed cases. They are coming from overseas, so they need to quarantine before they can go back to the community. So what they have used, just like any normal persons, they're clean.
Hong Kong's strict quarantine policies are intended to halt COVID-19 at the border. A government spokesperson said officials were aware of a surge in disposable waste since COVID began and urged people to adopt a green lifestyle as far as possible.
Our next story is about something that we all use on a daily basis. Emojis have emerged as a new global language. Today, there are over 3,500 of them, and the arsenal continues to expand on a regular basis. Our phones keep getting updated with new symbols and smiley faces. But it's not every day that emoticons manage to take people by surprise. There is now a new emoji that has left many people scratching their heads. It's an emoji featuring a pregnant man, released by Apple for iPhone users. It's been in discussion for several months, but Apple has now finally rolled it out along with other gender-neutral symbols. The internet, of course, was quick to react. Some people were amused, while others took offence and expressed displeasure. Many accused Apple of being too woke, asking the company to roll back its update. While it may be difficult for many people to understand this emoji in the first place, gender and sexuality are increasingly fluid concepts. People can be born as male or female, but then choose to be whomever they wish. And this could even mean that trans men could get pregnant. Thomas Beattie is a living example. The American man was born female, but subsequently underwent gender reassignment surgery. He had surgery to flatten his chest, but decided to keep his female reproductive organs. He eventually delivered 4 healthy babies. This isn't the first time that Apple has introduced more inclusive emojis. In 2019, the tech company added several same-sex couples and gender-neutral emojis to the keyboards of iPhones. Such emojis can help initiate conversations around gender inclusivity, because real change can only take place when ideas are discussed in a healthy fashion. Clearly, technology has evolved substantially, but attitudes, well, perhaps not so much. Finally from us today, Munich in Germany is marking the 50th anniversary of the 1972 Olympic Games, and it's doing so with Dachshunds, a short-legged, long-bodied, hound-type dog breed. Find out why, as I thank you for watching and invite you to join us again tomorrow for the Wednesday edition of WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'll see you then.
This is right, Arab.